Been in a lot of wars, bub. The brave always die first. Logan.
Welcome back, everyone. It's Charlie. This will be my full X-Men 97 episode 9 video. It went so hard. There are so many comic book Easter eggs, so many Easter eggs for the original series, for some other TV series too, like some classic pilots that never wound up making it to air. There was like a laundry list of connections and Easter eggs to a bunch of other things. So we'll break it all down. If you're brand new to the channel, be sure to subscribe to get all the episodes. Like I said before, we know we're getting at least season 3 and season 4 now. We could go beyond that. It sounds like Marvel is actually going to be doing new seasons back to back too, to try and get them out even faster. Careful for spoilers if you haven't seen the episode yet, because we'll be talking about everything. There's so much to talk about. Just starting at the beginning, the episode title is Tolerance's Extinction Part 2 of 3. They're doing that multi-episode arc like they did during the original animated series. One of the cool details too is that at the time that these originally aired back in the day, is that wasn't really common for children's programming like cartoons to do multi-episode serialized arcs like that. Generally, the title, like I said last week, is meant to be a reference to Operation Zero Tolerance with Bastion's storyline, the Prime Sentinels, but they also base this week's episode on a couple other major comic book storylines too, like very seminal comic book moments, WTF moments. Largely from the Fatal Attractions storyline. Beau DeMayo, the showrunner, even told people that was like the homework for this week. Like, everybody read up on Fatal Attractions, and they definitely did all the big stuff from that arc. My early prediction is most people will walk away from this episode, even if you didn't read the original Fatal Attractions storyline, just talking about Magneto ripping all the adamantium out of Wolverine's body. Usually when people refer back to the Fatal Attractions storyline, that's what they use to refer to it, like the time that Magneto ripped all the adamantium out of his body. Don't worry, we will talk about that when we get to that part of the episode, because there's some heavy implications based on that storyline of where things go after this. Everybody looking forward to Onslaught is just cheering in the background now. Like, as crazy as it is now, it's only going to get even crazier. The other Easter egg here too is that Fatal Attractions in the comics came right after the Asteroid M storyline, which they did in the original animated series, and that also heavily inspired part of the plot of this episode because Magneto literally brought back the wreckage or the remnants of Asteroid M. But in the original comic book version of this, it was just the X-Men fighting Magneto. There was no Bastion part of this. That's all from the Operation Zero Tolerance storyline and the Second Coming storyline. This time, they let Wolverine do the previously on
X-Men.
They used the standard X-Men theme song over the Marvel Animation logo. They also changed the intro a little bit. Storm is back now in the intro, but she's in her black suit from the comics. They also used the Asteroid M scene again because they adapted that part of the Fatal Attractions storyline that happened right after Asteroid M was destroyed, and they also literally brought Asteroid M back in the episode. And the coincidence is that right after the Asteroid M comes back, the Brotherhood of Mutants, Magneto fight the X-Men. That also kind of goes down that way in the episode too. The only difference is that a couple of the X-Men seem like they've sided with Magneto. Don't worry, we'll get to that too, because that might be part of a ruse based on the way the original Fatal Attractions comic book went down too. There were some betrayals that happened during that, but they were all ruses. The actual opening scene just picks up the next morning in the wreckage of the X-Mansion with Professor X waking up in his old bed. His wheelchair is there, none the worse for wear, because his yellow chair has basically been destroyed. Elsewhere, Magneto dons his old suit that he used to wear when he was thought of as a villain. You have to remember, though, he never thought of himself as a villain. Bastion takes his mother, still in Prime Sentinel form, back to their old home on their street, past all the other disabled Sentinels that Magneto just took out. Notice that he's crying. He is part human, so he can cry. I think they want to show that he does care about his mother. He didn't turn her into a Prime Sentinel because he hated her, even though he's completely insane. But I think the crying here just implies that she's perma-frozen, not dead though, but not really alive either, just kind of in this figue state, waiting until Forge and Beast can figure out a way to disable the Prime Sentinel nanobots. But it is a bit of a teaser, the idea that they can bring all these humans around the world back to normal. There's a bunch of Friends of Humanity and rioters that come after Jubilee and Sunspot. This guy in the jacket here is also featured in the intros. Magneto then uses his power to raise the wreckage of Asteroid M from the ocean left over from the original animated series. It's just been chilling there at the bottom of the ocean. Then Storm and Forge show up to help Sunspot and Jubilee. During this part of the episode, they visit a couple different rooms in the X-Mansion, and it's all been turned into Swiss cheese. But like I said in my previous episode 8 video, I think the idea is that eventually Professor X will just use his vast wealth to rebuild the X-Mansion. It gets destroyed all the time in the comics and all the time in the movies. No worries there, Professor X is a very rich person. He can rebuild it as many times as necessary. He doesn't care. Cyclops and Jean Grey catch up with him when she says the world will end in 12 hours. The idea is that when Magneto made his big electromagnetic pulse around the world, he weakened the Earth's electromagnetic field, basically weakening it to the point that Earth only has about 12 hours left till it completely loses that. Then it'll stop being able to shield the Earth from harmful radiation coming from Earth's sun, from space just in general, basically cooking everybody on the planet. So RIP everyone in about 12 hours. That's basically Magneto's plan, just let the Earth fry. It is a pretty good plan, like it is pretty hardcore. But this episode, just in general, goes really hard. Probably harder than any other episode that we've seen so far. Even harder than episode 5 when Gambit died. That episode is probably one of the high watermarks of the show. This episode is also right up there with that. We'll see if they can top it with episode 10, the actual finale. Cyclops kind of has it out with Professor X, especially the fact that he didn't leave the X-Men to him. Like, he basically thought that he didn't believe in him, but then Professor X explains the reason why he did things that way, why he left it to Magneto instead, is because he wanted Cyclops to be able to have a life with Jean Grey and their baby Cable. He wanted them to be able to leave. Here's the thing about that. That implies that he was also fooled by Mr. Sinister with Madeline Pryor, and he thought that it was the real Jean Grey, which seems kind of unlikely, but I think that's what they want you to believe here. But if you remember, during episode 1, Cyclops was actually ready to do that. They were about to actually leave. But he also correctly tells Professor X that even if they had left and done that, then everything still would have happened. They still would have had to deal with Mr. Sinister, with Madeline Pryor, and that reveal, the real Jean Grey coming back, also having to send Cable to the future like they did during episode 3. Everything with Bastion would have gone down the exact same way. Nothing would have changed, so it would have made no difference. But I think the real big moment here is Cyclops hearing from Professor X that it wasn't that he didn't believe in him, and that had been his fear this whole time. Love the way that Cyclops just kind of walks out the giant hole in the wall, like, I'm not talking to you anymore, and just leaves by walking through the wall. Rogue finally wakes up calling for Gambit, so they're addressing that. There's a lot of her processing her grief in the episode, kind of on speed run because things are happening so quickly. Nightcrawler catches her up on everything that happened since Trask turned into a Prime Sentinel. Basically, the world is about to end in 12 hours, that's what she needs to know. Jean Grey finally gets her real reunion with Storm, because remember, Storm was also fooled by Madeline Pryor, and then she left. Then all the stuff with the real Jean Grey coming back happened, so Storm was not around for that. Forge explains that he developed a defense against Magneto's electromagnetic pulse, which I also think is going to defend against Bastion's powers and will help defend against Magneto's powers too, even though obviously things kind of ended in a really specific way with Magneto. We'll get to that in a second. Mostly though, you have to remember Forge is trying to deal with Bastion, so I think it'll be more useful for dealing with Bastion. Basically shielding to protect them from his technopathic powers. They also confirmed Magneto's electromagnetic pulse took out all electronics around the entire world. The showrunner also said that it wound up killing a bunch of humans too when that happened, like he killed millions of people. This is also something that happened in the comics, but the reason why Magneto did the electromagnetic pulse around the world in the comics was because of the Fatal Attraction storyline, where they used the quote-unquote Magneto protocols, which they actually talk about later in the episode, but in a slightly different way. When Cyclops divides the X-Men into different blue and gold teams, those are from the comics, the classic comics, and they did a version of that more recently too. The actual members of the different teams are also meant to be similar to the teams they were on in the classic comics too. Blue team goes after Magneto, gold team goes after Bastion at his base, which they've located in the Galapagos Islands. There are a couple quick shots here too, I didn't mention it, so Sunspot here is wearing his classic suit from the New Mutants comics, and Forge is obviously wearing his X-Factor suit. We get a little pep talk from Storm, and Professor X explains his own history with Bastion, going way back to the original X-Men team, when Cyclops, Jean Grey, all the others were young teenagers.
The boy could communicate with machines. Cerebro had detected him, so I assumed he was a mutant.
He claims that he knew about Bastion long ago when Bastion was a child. Cerebro picked up on him when he was looking for different mutants around the planet and assumed that he was a mutant because of the way his technopath powers worked. Meaning that Bastion almost became part of that very first X-Men team that's depicted in the picture on the wall, which is also based on the original comic book first X-Men team from the 60s. But at the time, Bastion's mother hated the thought of him being a mutant at all, wouldn't have any of it, and Professor X didn't try to force it by using his powers to make her let him come. Magneto also references later in the episode, like Professor X no longer afraid to do the thing that needs to be done, whereas previously he was very careful about the way he used his powers on other people. Beast and Forge modified the original power damping collar they used on Jean Grey when she was full-on Dark Phoenix to disable her Phoenix powers, which they claim will do the same thing for Bastion's technopathic abilities. Apparently the normal mutant collars don't work on him, just the way his powers work and the fact that he's a Sentinel hybrid. Notice that Storm actually does Bastion a solid, like he shows Bastion a mercy when they say that they're going to permanently take away his powers, and Storm's like, oh no, don't do that, hell no, because that literally just happened to her. This also implies that they might find some sort of non-lethal way to deal with Bastion. Professor X also kind of implied that during his talk too, like if we can stop the threat of Bastion, he doesn't say kill Bastion, he just says stop Bastion as a threat. We get a little scene with Professor X talking with Rogue about Gambit, about running from your past like Gambit did, moving forward with your life, what things from your past you carry forward with you. This is all her processing her grief, like I said, at speedrun pace because they're moving so quickly through the plot. Then I love the way that Magneto literally shows up on their doorstep with Asteroid M in tow. Mind if I park this here? And look at how much mass it has. It's generating its own Aurora Borealis effect. That's how big it is. Magneto also correctly reminds him that the X-Men kind of belong to him, like you gave all this to me in your will, and the will still stands technically. The day in the bar that Magneto mentions is from before Professor X created the X-Men, before Magneto founded the Brotherhood of Mutants, when they were still very young. Magneto mentioned this event in an earlier episode, I think it was episode 5 when he talked about the dream for what Genosha eventually became. Then he tries to get a couple of the X-Men to turn and join him on Asteroid M, saying that he's going to replace Genosha with Asteroid M, like new Genosha. He actually did that during the original series until Cortez tried to hijack it from him, like Asteroid M was originally meant to be what Genosha was supposed to be. Magneto also echoes Professor X's catchphrase, saying, my X-Men, also what he said in episode 1, too.
Decide. My X-Men now belongs to me. My X-Men.
Then here's the thing with this Rogue betrayal. So Rogue makes it seem like she accepts Magneto's proposal and turns her back on the X-Men, joining him on Asteroid M, like turning her back on humanity, essentially. Sunspot kind of does the same thing too, but here's the thing. This might be a ruse if they're also adapting that part of the Fatal Attractions comic book, because a lot of the episode is inspired by that storyline. Part of that story involved Colossus pretending to leave the X-Men to join Magneto's team, but it was really just a ploy to infiltrate his group. So maybe Rogue is doing something similar, but the way the fights go down on Asteroid M, where she's actually helping stop the X-Men, kind of make it seem like she's either really trying hard to actually sell the lie, or maybe she really did briefly turn her back on the X-Men, but I still kind of think that it's meant to be a ruse. Like, that's why she's not trying to hurt the X-Men. You guys can let me know in the comments, like, do you think that Rogue was actually just secretly lying to Magneto, trying to fool him, and Professor X knew the whole time? They go to Muir Island, and they show you this shot of the hangar bay here. All this is meant to be old X-Men gear that they used in previous episodes of the animated series, and the original X-Men team during the 1960s. Like, in the context of the series, this is meant to have been the gear that the original X-Men team used, and some of the more modern versions of the team. But also it's an Easter egg for those original comic books too. For example, these two chairs are old ones that Professor X used in the past. These are their old cars, their old craft. This is an old model of the Blackbird from the 60s, I think. I think the idea is that it's meant to be based on the original version of their Blackbird. And you know, it also kind of looks like the Blackbird that they used during X-Men Pride of the X-Men, which I'll talk about in a second. Like the previous Blackbird they used during their previous show, and they also stored all the stuff from their previous show inside this base. It's almost like they're trying to canonize Pride of the X-Men to X-Men the Animated Series and X-Men 97. Some of you might recognize some of these toys too because they were sold as toys. This motorcycle was a toy they sold in stores. It's Wolverine's motorcycle. But this is also why all their super suits are meant to look like the classic versions of the suits, because all this gear is their old gear essentially. Cyclops and Cable have their father-son chat, and he gives him his yellow and blue X-Men suit. They make that Fox X-Men Bryan Singer joke about the black leather suits from the 2000 movie.
Almost forgot.
Oh, am I going to war or a circus?
What'd you expect? Black leather?
You actually go outside in these things? What would you prefer? Yellow spandex?
Isn't that joke so much more apropos now because of what's happening in Deadpool and Wolverine with him doing the live-action version of the yellow suit? Even though technically he's meant to be a different version of Wolverine, not the one from the main X-Men timeline. I do not think they did that joke knowing that Wolverine would be wearing his yellow suit in Deadpool and Wolverine. Like, I don't think that was announced till well after they'd actually written this particular episode. Notice Professor X is chatting with President Kelly inside the astral plane, and he's made it look like they're in the Oval Office just to make the president feel more comfortable. He just did the same thing to the Shi'ar High Council too. When they mention the Magneto protocols, this actually comes from the Fatal Attraction storyline, and it's the reason why in the comics Magneto did the Earth-wide electromagnetic pulse, but he did that in retaliation for the Magneto protocols. Those are basically something that the US government cooked up to use to try and stop Magneto from being able to use his powers on Earth, but in that Fatal Attraction storyline, they're unsuccessful and he retaliates by creating that giant electromagnetic pulse around the entire Earth, disabling all electronics around the planet. So you can see how they're adapting some of that storyline in slightly different ways for the TV show. Like a lot of the same stuff is happening, but for slightly different reasons and in slightly different places. They had their suit-up montage, all putting on their classic versions of the suits. Now, all these suits are from different eras in the comics, but the showrunner also said it's meant to be more of a direct reference to the unaired pilot episode of Pride of the X-Men, based on an X-Men TV show that never wound up making it to air in the late 80s, early 90s. It basically got canceled after the pilot back in 1989. Like, it's got the Australian version of Wolverine. Everybody sounds different because it's different voice actors too. And the plot is generally pretty silly. Like, it was criticized heavily by fans at the time. And if you watch it in present day, I think it's on YouTube right now, so you can actually go watch it. It's not nearly as good as X-Men the Animated Series was. And the reason why it never wound up actually making it to air is because at the time, Marvel started having a bunch of financial problems in real life. Like, this was right before their big bankruptcy. Basically, at the time that show got canceled, all of their animated programming from the 80s basically got wiped out. A couple years later, though, you have X-Men the Animated Series starting, and then you have all the 90s animated shows, like a completely separate universe, which now they kind of brought back through X-Men 97 with all of these different cameos. But they got Cyclops in a version of his classic blue suit from number 39 in the comics. This is old school. Wolverine in his classic brown suit. Jean Grey in her classic Marvel Girls suit. Rogue is wearing her X-Men Legacy green suit. Jubilee is wearing her black suit that she did when she was a vampire briefly in the comics. Cable's blue and yellow suit is from his solo run in the 90s, and the idea also in the context of the show is that it's meant to incorporate his pouches from his original suit and look similar to Cyclops' previous suit. So part of the idea is that Cyclops is giving his son a suit based on his own suit. Papa bless. When they say goodbye, Cyclops and Jean Grey seem like they've made up. Also later in the episode, Jean Grey tells him that she loves him. Then we see Bastion again. It seems like he's jacked himself into all of his systems and is basically finger puppeting all of his defenses, which mostly consists of a giant force of classic Sentinels, but that's really just meant to be the beginning. Like, obviously they wanted you to focus more on the Magneto ending than the Bastion ending in this episode. Most of the rest of the Bastion part of the episode in the finale I think will be based on the Second Coming storyline. This scene of them trying to avoid all the Sentinels, trying not to get shot down, is meant to parallel the scene from episode 1 when something similar happened. Storm makes another Phoenix reference when talking about Jean Grey's strength, then goes full Omega level and creates this giant storm around the volcano. Notice all the Sentinel heads lying around too. This isn't the Savage Land, but it has a very Savage Land kind of vibe to it. When the Sentinels find them, notice they speak with Bastion's voice because he's basically finger puppeting all of them. Then we finally get our Hulk cameo scene, and it's Morph changing into Hulk, so instead of saying Hulk smash, he says Morph smash. The other thing going on here too is that he doesn't lose his intelligence when he changes because he's just mimicking the Hulk's powers. I know there'll be a lot of questions about this too, like does he have all of the Hulk's powers? Like can he get as strong as the Hulk? Like will his power just continue scaling as he gets madder? The answer is no, it's temporary and it doesn't work that way, so I think he only has a fractional amount of the Hulk's power or anybody else's power that he mimics. He doesn't have their full power. Like if he mimicked Professor X or Jean Grey, he wouldn't have their entire level of power. They also reveal another Easter egg here too. This is the diner that Trask visited Mr. Sinister at previously, and it's called DeMayo's Diner, named for Bo DeMayo, the former showrunner. A little bit awkward now too, because he also got fired before episode 1 aired. Mr. Sinister and Jean Grey have a bit of a rematch, fighting each other for the first time since she escaped, and he cloned her basically. He also claims he used all that time to learn all of her weaknesses, which I totally believe. There are a couple of visual gags with their fight here too, like she throws him down a bowling alley, knocks over the bowling pins, then throws a bunch of bowling balls at him. Then as the X-Men Blue team arrives on Asteroid M, notice Magneto has turned the remnants of the three-headed Wild Sentinel into his new throne, which is dark, very dark, even for him. Like I said, when Rogue tries to stop Wolverine from killing Magneto or stopping him, I'm not totally sure if she's faking it to try and fool Magneto, because it doesn't look like she's trying to hurt Wolverine, and it doesn't look like Roberto is trying to hurt Jubilee either. Some of this might be for show, and like they just didn't tell all the X-Men what was really going on. Basically, Professor X's plan is to remove Magneto's helmet so that he can use his psychic powers on him to force him to use his powers to restore Earth's electromagnetic field so everybody on the planet doesn't fry in the next 12 hours. Back at Bastion's base, he detects Morph in Mr. Sinister form because his heir wasn't actually saying that he cared about Bastion, and Mr. Sinister would never care about anybody else. Then he catches Beast. He also takes out Storm and Forge with the Sentinels, so part of the idea is that he has Team Gold X-Men dead to rights, and Mr. Sinister almost seems like he has Jean Grey dead to rights with Cable. Because next big WTF, he also reveals that he genetically implanted controls inside Cable with his crystal, just like he did for Madeline Pryor, so he's trying to finger puppet Cable to kill Jean Grey. And they use it to reveal all of Cable's telekinetic powers. So the idea is that he has all the same powers as Jean Grey and Madeline Pryor. He got all of his powers from Madeline Pryor. In the comics, it's a little bit different, but on the show, Madeline Pryor is meant to have all the same powers as Jean Grey except for the Phoenix Force, meaning telepathy and telekinesis, about on the same power level too. So the idea is that Cable is meant to be just as powerful telekinetically as Jean Grey is, so it's meant to be a pretty even fight. She makes it seem like she's about to die when she reaches out to Cyclops psychically saying that she loves him. But here's the thing, there are a couple ways she could actually come out of this on top, and one of them involves the Phoenix Force manifesting again. That is the one thing that Mr. Sinister in the comics was not able to replicate. When Mr. Sinister cloned Madeline Pryor in the comics, he was doing so that he would have somebody with access to the Phoenix Force, but when she didn't get that access, he considered her a failure. So the Phoenix Force is like the one thing that Mr. Sinister can't counteract. So if in this moment Jean Grey can manifest the Phoenix Force, she should be okay. Then we basically get the end of that Fatal Attractions comic book, like the most WTF of WTF moments that we've seen on the show so far, next to Gambit dying. Wolverine gets Magneto's helmet off briefly, Professor X starts making him heal the Earth with his powers, but Cyclops stops him so that the Gold Team has time to stop Bastion and Mr. Sinister so that they don't restore all electronics on Earth while Bastion is still alive, because then he'd be able to use the entire Earth against them. But that gives Magneto enough time to recover. Wolverine skewers him, also right out of the Fatal Attractions book. He basically guts him with his adamantium claws. He was trying to kill him in that moment. And just like the comic book, in the next moment, Magneto retaliates, nearly going insane, by ripping all the adamantium out of his body. They even animated the scene on the show to look just like the comic book panel. And even though they end on this cliffhanger, like boom, slam to black, we'll pick up in the finale right after this moment. In the comics, the reason why people are really hyped up about Onslaught coming is that after this, Professor X wound up lobotomizing Magneto basically with his power, and then that led to the creation of Onslaught. So it is totally possible now that either in the finale they do a version of Onslaught, or they tease that and they do Onslaught during season 2. But also, there's so much happening in this moment, like Wolverine will now have to start season 2 with no adamantium in his body. The other big thing to come out of this moment in the comics is that Wolverine learned that his claws were actually bone claws. Before this, he just assumed that he got his claws when the adamantium was bonded to his skeleton in the Weapon X program. They did the bone claws in the live-action movies with Hugh Jackman's version a bunch of times, though. But part of the idea is that we're going to head into the finale. Obviously, they have to finish dealing with Magneto. I think the way that goes down is going to be very similar to the Fatal Attractions comic book, like what happens after this moment in the book. All the Bastion stuff, I think, is going to be closer to the Second Coming arc, where Bastion basically came back as the final boss form version of himself. More of like a direct confrontation between the X-Men and Bastion, as opposed to his other forces like the Sentinels that he was using as a defense. So generally, there's still a lot of hanging plot threads here, like did Rogue and Sunspot really betray the X-Men to join Magneto? What is going to happen to them on Asteroid M after Professor X seemingly retaliates by lobotomizing Magneto? How are they going to help Wolverine? Keep in mind he's going into a coma here, but his healing factor keeps him alive, so he's still alive here. But think about how they're going to begin season 2 after all this wreckage, just like a string of WTF moments. And this is just the beginning, like the finale is probably going to go harder than any other episode before. There have been a couple of teasers in previous episodes about where they might pick up in season 2, like there's William Stryker, he was on TV. They might do some of the Purifiers at the beginning of season 2. Maybe a little War of Kings, maybe Messiah Complex, maybe Dark Reign, Avengers vs. X-Men. They were teasing that too in previous episode, with the Avengers being really pissed off with the X-Men. Particularly Captain America being really pissed off at Rogue. Maybe teasing how Apocalypse is connected to a lot of this too. Didn't really see any hints of him in this episode just because they were so focused on Magneto in the Bastion storyline. And there's still the theory that Gambit will come back in the finale. There'll be some teaser for him returning. I'm still wondering if they're going to turn him into the Horseman of Death, like Apocalypse will resurrect him as his Horseman of Death. There's so much to talk about, so much going on in this episode, so everybody just post all your favorite moments, and if there's any like big Easter eggs or references that you spotted that I didn't talk about in the video, just write them below in the comments. One of the reasons why X-Men 97 has been so much fun to watch is because it is so dense with references, Easter eggs, and nods to other different things, not just the original show, but also the classic comics, also a lot of real-life stuff, other TV shows. Generally hoping they continue to make this for as many seasons as possible. Like, please do not stop. Just keep going. It's crazy how good this show has been, and some of the other animated stuff that they've done recently has been so mid. If you have any special requests for bonus videos before episode 10 airs, let me know in the comments. There's also a couple videos I have planned after the finale. And because we're heading into June, June is going to be stacked with shows. Like we have The Boys Season 4, House of the Dragon Season 2, and the Star Wars Acolyte show. So it is going to be crazy this summer. Make sure to enable alerts for my channel so you don't miss any of that. Everybody click here to learn about Gambit becoming the Horseman of Death and how that went down previously. And click here for all those brand new trailers from this past weekend. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.